Still playing chef? Dad asked across the Easter dinner table, his voice carrying that particular blend of disappointment and condescension he'd perfected over 15 years of dismissing my career. Mom sighed dramatically, passing the ham. We didn't pay for college for this, Jordan. A business degree from Cornell, wasted on cooking. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it until it buzzed again and again and again, relentlessly demanding attention. Why were 17 notifications flooding my screen simultaneously with the same headline? Breaking. Chef Jordan Okonkwo makes history as first to win 3 James Beard Awards in single year? I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly trembling. Best Chef, Great Lakes. Outstanding Restaurant. Best New Restaurant. 3 awards. The first person ever to sweep all 3 in a single ceremony. My sister Danielle leaned over. What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. I turned the phone toward the table, watching as my family read the headline one by one. Dad's smirk dissolving, Mom's fork freezing midair, my brother Terrence choking on his wine. Well, I said quietly, I guess the playing paid off. I knew I wanted to cook from the moment I was old enough to reach the stove. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, taught me. She'd grown up in Mississippi, learned to cook from her mother, and brought those traditions north during the Great Migration. Her kitchen was magic. The smell of cornbread, the sizzle of chicken frying, the patient way she'd explain each step while I stood on a step stool, watching with wide eyes. Food is love, baby, she'd tell me. Everything else is just conversation. My parents saw things differently. Dad was an investment banker who measured success in quarterly returns. Mom was a corporate attorney who measured it in billable hours. They'd both clawed their way up from modest beginnings, and they were determined that their children would start where they'd arrived, not where they'd begun. You can cook as a hobby, Mom said when I was 15 and announced I wanted to attend culinary school. But your career needs to be something stable, something respectable. Cooking is respectable. Cooking is what women in our family did, because they had no other options. You have options, Jordan. Don't waste them. I went to Cornell. I got my business degree. I did everything they asked. And then, the month after graduation, I enrolled in culinary school anyway. The Culinary Institute of America was 2 years of joy and exhaustion. I thrived there in ways I never had at Cornell. The precision of knife work, the chemistry of baking, the art of flavor composition. Everything clicked into place like I'd been waiting my whole life for this language. My parents stopped speaking to me for 6 months. When they finally resumed contact, it was with conditions. We're not supporting this financially, Dad said. If you want to play chef, you do it on your own. So I did. I worked at restaurants throughout my training, staging at fine dining establishments, learning from chefs who'd sacrificed everything for their craft. I graduated with honors and debt, but also with connections and skills that no business degree could have given me. My first job was at a well-respected Chicago restaurant, working the line for $14 an hour. My parents told people I was finding myself. Within 2 years, I was sous chef. Within 4, I was executive chef at a different restaurant, one that earned its first Michelin star under my leadership. My parents told people I was still figuring things out. When I left that position to open my own restaurant, they were certain I'd finally failed badly enough to come to my senses. I named the restaurant Ruth's after my grandmother. She died 3 months before we opened, but I made sure her photo hung in the kitchen, watching over every dish that left for the dining room. The first 2 years were brutal. I'd opened in a developing neighborhood, betting on gentrification that was slower to arrive than predicted. Rent ate through my savings. Staff turnover was constant. There were nights I slept on a cot in the office because I couldn't afford gas to drive home. My family's commentary was relentless. Still pouring money into that place? Dad asked at Christmas. You know, it's not too late to pivot. I have contacts who could get you into consulting. The restaurant business has a 90% failure rate, Terrence offered helpfully. The smart money says you should cut your losses. We're just worried about you, Mom added, in a tone that suggested worry was a euphemism for embarrassment. They didn't know about the food critic who'd visited anonymously and written a glowing review for the Tribune. They didn't know about the regulars who drove 45 minutes each way just to eat my grandmother's recipes reimagined for the 21st century. They didn't know about the culinary magazine that had named me one of 30 chefs to watch. They didn't know because they never asked. And I'd stopped volunteering information to people who only wanted confirmation of my failure. Year 3, everything changed. The neighborhood finally turned. New condos brought new residents with disposable income and adventurous palates. A viral TikTok video of our signature dish, Nana Ruth's chicken and waffles, deconstructed and elevated, brought lines around the block. A New York Times feature called Ruth's, the most exciting restaurant in the Midwest. I expanded, hired more staff, opened for lunch, launched a catering arm, started work on a second location. My parents still asked when I was going to get a real job. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. They'd see magazine features and assume they were small, local publications. They'd hear about reservations being booked 3 months out and assume I was lying or exaggerating. They'd constructed a narrative where I was failing, and no amount of evidence could penetrate it. The James Beard nominations came in February. 3 nominations in 3 major categories, a historic first. The culinary world exploded with coverage. My name was everywhere, attached to phrases like revolutionary and once in a generation. My parents didn't mention it at our monthly family dinner. "How's the restaurant?" Dad asked, in the same tone he'd used for 15 years. "Busy," I said. "We're nominated for some awards." "That's nice." He turned to Terrence. "How's the merger going?" I stopped trying to share after that. The Easter ambush shouldn't have surprised me. My family had always used holiday gatherings as opportunities to express their disappointment en masse. Something about the forced togetherness made them bold, as if collective disapproval was more legitimate than individual criticism. "Still playing chef?" Dad's question was the opening salvo. "We didn't pay for college for this," Mom added the second volley. I'd learned to absorb these attacks without reaction, to let the words wash over me like water off a duck's back. I had a restaurant to run, a staff who depended on me, customers who loved what we created. My family's opinion was irrelevant to any of it. But that day was different. The awards ceremony had been 2 days earlier. I'd won all 3 categories, an unprecedented sweep that had made national news. I'd expected my family to have seen something, heard something, acknowledged something. They hadn't mentioned it at all. When my phone started buzzing with alerts, I realized why. The ceremony had been held on Saturday evening. The news had broken on Sunday, but my family avoided news on Sundays. Family Day, they called it. They'd spent Easter Sunday morning at church, and then come straight to dinner. They genuinely didn't know. And somehow, their ignorance was worse than their active dismissal. The silence after I showed them my phone lasted approximately 15 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. 3 James Beard Awards? How is that possible? Why didn't you tell us you were nominated? I didn't even know this ceremony existed. This is like the Oscars of food, right? I think I've heard of this. I sat quietly, watching my family scramble to recalibrate their understanding of my life. "Jordan," Mom said finally, her voice strangely small. "Why didn't you tell us?" I tried. In February, when the nominations were announced. You asked about Terrence's merger instead. But this is huge. This is national news. It's been building for years, Mom. The reviews. The features. The recognition. None of it was secret. You just weren't paying attention. Dad cleared his throat. "We would have come to the ceremony if we'd known. Would you? You've never visited the restaurant. Not once in 5 years. You've never asked about my menu, my staff, my plans. Every conversation we have about my career consists of you asking when I'm going to quit." I shook my head. "Why would I invite you to the biggest night of my professional life? So you could ask when I was getting a real job during my acceptance speech." The table went quiet. Danielle broke the silence. "I've eaten at Ruth's," she said quietly. "Last fall. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want Jordan to think I was checking up on her." I looked at my sister, surprised. It was incredible, like nothing I've ever tasted. The fried chicken had this honey lavender glaze that made me cry. She laughed softly. "I cried over chicken, Jordan. That's how good it was. You never said anything." I was ashamed. We've all been so dismissive. And there you were, creating something beautiful while we sat around predicting your failure. She met my eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have said something." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We were trying to protect you. The restaurant business is brutal. We've seen friends lose everything. So instead of supporting me through the risk, you decided to undermine my confidence at every opportunity? That's protection. We didn't mean to undermine. Still playing chef? Get a real job? We didn't pay for college for this?" I listed the phrases that had accumulated over 15 years. What part of that was supportive? He had no answer. Mom reached across the table toward me. Jordan, we're proud of you. We've always been proud. No, you've always been afraid for me. That's different. I pulled my hand back. Pride means celebrating someone's choices. Fear means waiting for them to fail so you can say, I told you so. You've been waiting for 15 years. Aren't you tired? The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. My parents admitted their fear, not just for me, but of me. Of what it meant that I'd succeeded on a path they'd rejected. Of the implication that their own choices, their own values, might not be the only valid ones. We measured success by stability, Dad said. Because that's what we didn't have growing up. We wanted to give you kids something solid to stand on. I understand that. But stability isn't the only kind of success. And certainty isn't the only kind of safety. I know that now. Watching you. He trailed off, struggling. You built something real, Jordan. Something that didn't exist before you created it. That's more than I ever did. Dad. No, let me say this. I've spent my career making money for other people's visions. You've spent yours realizing your own. That takes more courage than I've ever had. It was the closest he'd ever come to an apology. They came to Ruth's the following week. I gave them the full experience, the tasting menu, the wine pairings, the stories behind each dish. I watched my father's eyes widen at flavors he'd never encountered. Watched my mother photograph every plate like a tourist discovering something precious. This one, I said, placing the final course before them, is Nana Ruth's sweet potato pie. Her exact recipe, updated with a brown butter crust and bourbon caramel. Mom started crying before she took a bite. She would have been so proud of you, she whispered. I'm so sorry we weren't. You're here now. We should have been here years ago. Yes, but you're here now. That's what matters. The awards sit on a shelf in my office at Ruth's, visible to anyone who walks in. 3 James Beard medals, representing years of work, sacrifice, doubt, and determination. They're meaningful, tangible recognition from the highest authorities in my industry. But they're not why I cook. I cook because of a grandmother who taught me that food is love. Because of customers who drive hours to taste something that reminds them of home. Because of a staff who believes in what we're creating. Because every night, we send dishes into the dining room that make people feel something true. My family visits regularly now. Dad has become obsessed with our seasonal tasting menu. Mom brings friends and brags loudly about my daughter, the award-winning chef. Even Terrence, who once counseled me to cut my losses, has invested in the second location. They ask questions now. Real questions about the business, the food, the industry. They still don't fully understand what I do, but they've stopped pretending that misunderstanding equals failure. Still playing chef? Dad asked last month, but this time he was smiling. Still playing, I agreed. Turns out I'm pretty good at it. They said my restaurant failed because they couldn't imagine success that looked different from theirs. They measured my life against their expectations and found it lacking. But Nana Ruth knew something they didn't. The things worth doing are rarely the things worth predicting. I built Ruth's because I loved it, not because it was safe. Now I have 3 awards, 2 locations, and 1 family that finally sees me clearly. The playing was never pointless. It was practice for exactly this moment.